And we're on. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Tiger Club digital meeting for Tuesday, October 6th. We're delighted to have our old friend Blair Kerkhoff at the Kansas City Star. As you know, Blair's been at the Star for decades, and he covers very good on the college sports scene, but also covers the Chiefs and the Royals. Blair, were you out at Arrowhead last night?
I was not. I'm sitting in a broadcast studio here at the Kansas City Star, and last night I was just outside the studio at a desk covering the game from a desk at the Star office. In fact, Vahe Gregorian and I were sitting socially distant, 8 or 10 feet apart from each other, watching the game on big screens and taking notes and following social media and talking to folks who were at the game afterwards. But no, this is the first time since I started covering the Chiefs, and really the first time in my professional career that I've covered events from television. And it's a different world, a different way of doing business, but it's the way of the world right now. We did have two reporters there, so Herbie Teope, our main beat writer, and Sam Mellinger, one of our columnists, were at Arrowhead Stadium getting the exact same access in the post game that Vahe and I were getting sitting here in the office. Zoom calls with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and some other players.
Well, again, I remind everybody that's on the digital viewing today. If you have a question, just go to the chat feature at the bottom of Zoom, and we'll get those after Blair talks to us for a little bit. Blair, let's talk about the Mizzou Tigers. That's our primary topic of interest. You were at the Alabama game.
I was.
Don't know how much you could take away from that game, but I thought the Tigers held pretty well. Tennessee, it was a little bit of a rough day for Mizzou. Your thoughts on the Tigers so far?
It was. I sure would love to have seen that game. I wonder how that game would have unfolded if had it not been for the interception after the Tigers had punched in the touchdown in the second half. I actually thought the play call was on the interception, on Bazelak's interception, was a pretty good play call that the Tennessee defensive player read superbly. And Bazelak, you just can't blame him for having the knowledge not to throw that pass. I think in a year or two, maybe even later this season, he recognizes what's going on and he eats that ball or checks down, finds another receiver. But I was a couple of things impressed me about the game. I did like the way after Missouri got down that they responded, and that was true of the Alabama game as well. And we saw it again at Tennessee. I love the 4th-and-1 call, the pass to Christopherson. I loved it because it worked. But basically what that showed me is Missouri had the type of athletes at quarterback and tight end that can make that play work. And it was a bold play call and it moved. And I love the 4th down touchdown call that got Roundtree into the end zone that cut the margin. I'm a big fan of Roundtree. I think he's an NFL back and really one of the better things Missouri's got going for him now. Bolton played his butt off until he got hurt. Yeah. I think he had 13 tackles by the midway of the third quarter before he went out of the game. There are some pieces with this team, and I just see some issues on both sides of the line, the offensive and defensive line, that the Tigers are going to have to work with this year. But look, I didn't go into this season thinking this was a team that was going to contend for the division title. I was kind of hoping it could get to 6 wins and get bowl eligible back when we were thinking about seasons in a 12-game schedule way. I don't know where it goes from here, but I guess I should say after the Alabama and Tennessee games, I still think that the Tigers are going to match up okay with almost everybody else left on the schedule. Georgia's going to be a tough one, Florida tough, of course, LSU. But other than that, I think Missouri's got the opportunity to match up with the Kentuckys and the South Carolinas and the Mississippi States of the schedule. So it could be another week or so before we see a victory or Eli Drinkwitz's first victory.
How tough is it? This is a rhetorical question, I guess, but how tough is it? New coach, new system, new quarterback, no spring practice. We
Yeah,
have to take that in consideration this year.
no, absolutely, and not only no quarterback, but quarterback that you had in the program for a year hadn't played in a year and a half, and so you think that would give an advantage to Missouri, get a little additional time to work with Sean Robinson and develop him the way that and shape him the way that you want him shaped for that offense. And I'm not sure how fair it was for him and his status to open the next chapter of his college career against Alabama. I mean, my gosh, I was looking at the depth chart when I was sitting in the press box on a week ago Saturday and looking at Alabama's depth chart. And then I Googled NFL mock drafts 2021, and I found one of them, a reputable mock draft that had 9 Alabama players taken in the first round. Now, I doubt that's going to happen. It's never happened before, that many players from one school taken in the first round of an NFL draft. But that gives you an idea of what Missouri was up against. Now, the Tigers, Bolton was listed as a first-round draft pick in that mock draft. And, hey, I think it's a great year if Missouri has a first-round draft talent on its team. Alabama had 9 of them. And spread across the team, right? Every position group, maybe except quarterback, running back, offensive lineman, the wide receivers. That Waddle kid is unbelievable, and all across the defense. So, not really fair. But to be honest with you, from what I've seen through 2 games, I certainly am. I'm sort of moved toward Bazelak as a guy that needs to be getting more snaps and more action, and I do like what I've seen from him.
Looking across the SEC landscape, interesting score. Well, I listened to your podcast with Seren Petro last week, and you talked a lot about Mike Leach and Mississippi State's win over LSU, and then they get beat this week by Arkansas. What do we take from all this?
Well, I think Mississippi State fans got the full Mike Leach experience in 2 weeks. The ability to get a team ready with a lot of preparation to go toe to toe and prevail over an LSU team that I think was overrated going into the season. I vote in the AP top 25, and I had LSU in the top 10, but I think I had them closer to the 9 or 10. Others had them 5, 6, and this was an LSU team that lost about 17 or 18 starters from last year. It's just too much to ask for them to be a top 5 team, and I think Mississippi State understood that, and Leach was able to script a game plan to take advantage of that, and then to turn around and see what Arkansas was able to do to the Bulldogs. I think one of the conclusions we draw from that is Barry Odom was a heck of a defensive coordinator, and we know that he's didn't get it done as a head coach at Missouri, but he can scheme up a defense. We saw it the previous week when Arkansas played Georgia. That game was 7-2 into the third quarter, with Arkansas going toe to toe with the team that we think is no worse than the second best team in the SEC. So, look, it's good for the SEC that Arkansas is better. I don't want to see any team in the conference be as bad as Arkansas has been the last few years. But now I've got to get Missouri going and make sure that when we need to see a point, to me, when Missouri's doing things the way Drinkwitz wants it to be done, that this team is capable of beating, playing with anyone and beating others like Missouri in the conference.
Everybody, please make sure your lines are muted. We've got some feedback coming in. Blair, what do we expect this week when Mizzou goes LSU?
Well, I guess the first question is the game going to be played on Saturday night at LSU? So if you stayed up and watched a Chiefs game as I did last night, I get home after midnight and didn't set the alarm until 8 a.m. So I wake up this morning to the Weather Channel and see where Hurricane Delta has been up. Yesterday it was a Cat 2, and now it's up to a Category 4. Supposed to hit Louisiana, make landfall on Friday, a day before the game. So here we go with weather affecting games in that part of the country, or potentially affecting games there. So I know that Missouri and LSU officials have been communicating with each other now for several hours, looking over options for that game. And one of the options is that game being played in Columbia on Saturday. That's something that's been discussed. And the latest that I've heard, and I talked to Suichi Terada, who you guys know is the Tigers beat writer, about a half hour ago, and he was saying that neutral site hasn't been a discussion point yet. But it sounds like it's from him, and it's certainly early in the process, and we know how unpredictable weather can be. That the game's either going to be played in Baton Rouge or at Columbia on Saturday. One thing that he pointed out, and I didn't realize this, is both Missouri and LSU have an open week together in week 7 of the season, but the league did that to hold for created that opening for COVID possibilities, rescheduling games for if needed in the pandemic, as the Chiefs and Patriots played a rescheduled game last night, Steelers and the Titans in the NFL. So the SEC, worked in a open week and just for COVID. I don't think the teams want to use that for weather if there are other options available. So I guess I wouldn't be surprised right now if that game ended up in Columbia. Boy, it'd be a quick ticket turnaround situation, and all the headaches that are involved with administrative wise, having people get to work at at Faurot Field. But that I think to pay attention to that, and that's a possibility. On the field, I haven't seen the line. I would imagine, just as a guess, it'd be somewhere in the low double digits, 11, 12.
I think I saw it was at 20 initially.
Oh my gosh! Well,
I'm
how interesting. But what if LSU had beaten Mississippi State in the opener? Or that would have been interesting call. But 20, I don't know. Like I said, I think I've seen enough of Missouri. I got to tell you, Missouri played Alabama better than Texas A&M played Alabama.
Yeah.
They sure did. And I don't know if that says more about Texas A&M or Alabama, but A&M entered the season with a really nice ranking, and I think A&M is an annually overrated team anyway. But I don't know. Maybe it's because I've got some regional bias, and I've got to say and admit that I think Eli Drinkwitz handled the offseason about as well as a new coach, under the circumstances that he was presented, could have handled it. I thought recruiting was the success was an acceptable level, and I thought that that his interactions with the media were terrific, much much better than Barry Odom, who I thought was not uncomfortable around the media, just didn't just wasn't. I think Barry Odom preferred more of a one-on-one in his office type of interview than he did press conference settings. And obviously, ever since the opening introductory press conference with Eli Drinkwitz, we haven't had that type of interaction with him. They've all been Zoom calls and these types of things. And I have found him to be engaging and smart and there's just sharp mind guy. And I go back to the success he had last year at Appalachian State and the success he had as an offensive coordinator at his previous stops. I'm still kind of drinking the Eli Drinkwitz Kool-Aid a little bit, and think that he's going to get it done, and it's just a kind of a matter of when and against whom, and can he get the type of athletes he needs along the defense and offensive lines to compete in this conference, and when will that happen?
Well, I think we all feel the same way. He came and talked to the club in February at the flea market and bought beers for everybody in attendance.
There you go.
He won our hearts immediately. He's a very impressive guy, and as you said, during the off season, the deal where they went down to the courthouse and registered everybody's vote, I was very impressed.
How smart was that? I mean, what a smart thing. I was so impressed with that. Missouri was one of the very first schools to do something like that, to protest, turn the march, the social unrest situation, and turn it into a positive, and got a lot of positive feedback, registering athletes to vote who had not been registered to vote. I just thought that was a win for Missouri and for Eli Drinkwitz. And look, all of this it's great, right? It's all fun. It's good publicity. But you got to see the performance in the field. And I made the mistake on Saturday after the game of going through some social media reaction from Missouri fans, and man, they've got to be I must have fallen into the ugly space of social media, because there were some ugly reactions from that game. Hey, look, maybe Tennessee's better. I'm used to Tennessee being another one of those programs that seems to be annually overrated. And maybe Jeremy Pruitt's got it turned around in Tennessee, but they've got the winning streak going. They haven't beaten an Alabama or Georgia during that time, but they seem to have it going in the right direction at Tennessee.
Well, and I think we all need to stay away from some of the social media stuff. That there's pretty dark sides on that. So, college football in general, or college sports in general, this is a wide open question. But when the dust settles, losses of revenue, cutting of sports, is this a transformational point in the history of college athletics?
That's a good question. I was talking to Dennis Dodd about this yesterday. Dennis and I were chatting. I think it is. I think it's something of a pivot point for college sports, and we've started to see it in different ways. You haven't seen many sports eliminated from the Power Five conference schools, SEC, Big 12, ACC, et cetera, except at Stanford, which eliminated 11 non-revenue sports, 11 of its 36. They sponsor 36 sports.
Yeah,
so they eliminated 11 of them. And so Stanford, which funds its sports to play for national championships in all of them. There are only a handful of schools that really do that. Ohio State is one, but even an Alabama or teams that win national championships in other popular sports don't fund their non-revenues to be competitive nationally every year. But Stanford is one of those schools that does. So even when Stanford's feeling the pinch, then things are different. So you leave the Power Five and you drop to the Group of Five, and those are the Conference USAs and the MAC and the Sun Belt and the Mountain West, and those schools have not hesitated to drop sports. And I'll just use the example of my alma mater and the school that employed Coach Drinkwitz previously, Appalachian State. When I was in school there in the late 1970s, men's soccer was a big deal. Appalachian State was one of the very first schools that recruited internationally to become a competitive program nationally. They went to Europe and Africa to get athletes, and they were fantastic. They were in the NCAA tournament every year. They would win games, advance in the bracket, and just a couple months ago, App State eliminated men's soccer, and it was just such a tough thing to see. And you look at other schools in those conferences. I know University of Cincinnati is another one that has dropped some sports, and if you don't have if you're not part of a conference that's plugged into the multi-billion-dollar television contract, you are having a very difficult time right now funding your athletics. Hell, Missouri right now is having a difficult time funding athletics. Texas laid off 35 athletic administrators a couple of months ago. Texas, which has the largest budget in all of college sports, had to tighten its belt. So, yeah, we are seeing a change not only on that front, the reduction of the sports menu at schools at all levels, but just the idea of athlete empowerment, I think, is also a sea change in college sports. It did not happen because of George Floyd and the social unrest of the summer, but I think that became an accelerant of the empowerment of the student athlete. So we were already down the road when it came to name, image, and likeness, and athletes starting to cash in on having the ability to cash in on that. I think that as college sports begins to sort out how that's going to work, whether it's going to be federally dictated or it's just going to be a state by state thing, which I don't think will happen. But or is the NCAA going to try to operate it? And we'll see what happens. But that is going to be a big change when it comes to college athletics. Now, you would think if a school, let's just take Alabama football, has the opportunity to football, Alabama, where football is not only king, but queen and court and everything. It's everything to the state of Alabama. Nebraska, the same way locally. It's the biggest thing in the world to the people that live in those states. Well, won't they have an advantage of being able to pay the athletes, more money for their name, image, and likeness than other schools do? My response to that is that's Alabama's going to get, 5 of the top 15 players in the country anyway, under any circumstance, under any set of rules. It's not going to change anything about that. And I think we'll see a cap on the amount of money that athletes can receive when it comes to name, image, and likeness. But at least that's a change as well. So some things won't change, right? I don't think conference realignment is on the table for any of this. It just doesn't make sense right now. TV contracts are I think everybody's pretty happy with what they've got. The Big 12 is going to be up for negotiation here pretty soon. I think their contract runs out in 24-25. But I think those sort of issues are not going to be affected by where we are now.
Okay. One question from our viewers: once normalcy returns, God willing, do you think more coverage by broadcasters and writers will be done remotely, as is now the common practice?
That's another good question. We haven't talked a lot about it. We're just sort of kind of battling through the unique conditions that we've been presented with now. Just a little while ago, in fact, just before we started this, I was on a call with our bosses, and we talked about covering the Chiefs and Mizzou and Kansas State, KU. We didn't travel with the Royals after the first series this year. They went to Cleveland and Chicago, and I think we went to Cleveland, and then our writer came home, and all games were covered from either the home games. Writer went to Kauffman Stadium, and for the road games, covered them from television. With the Chiefs, I went to LA for the Chargers game with Vahe, and Vahe went to Baltimore, but we have been told we're not going to travel with the Chiefs for the Buffalo game because of COVID and the restrictions that New York has placed on travel from different states, Missouri and Kansas being two of the states that they're asking people to quarantine if they travel in from. So Soichi went to Knoxville this past weekend, and we had the writer who covers Kansas State go see K-State win at Oklahoma 2 weeks ago. But I think for the next few weeks, we're not going to travel with these teams, and we're going to see how that plays out. And when things return to normal, I'm hoping that the coverage of sports returns to normal as well. The one thing that I miss dearly about the way we go about our business is not having the ability to attend a game and then go into the locker room for the NFL after the game, or for a college game, ask for half a dozen players to come out of the locker room and share their thoughts on the game. All of our post games now are done via Zoom, and we can request players to come to those Zoom calls, but we don't always get who we request. It's just kind of left up to the schools to determine who comes out and talks to us via Zoom, and that's been frustrating. I think it's affected our coverage, and so going into the locker room and talking to a dozen Chiefs players after a game, you just go from locker to locker to talk to players, and it would not just support the stories you're writing that night, but give you ideas for stories that you would do later. And not only that, but develop relationships with players in that setting. We just don't get to do that now. So I know that writers associations, every sport has them. They've all advocated for when the vaccine or whatever comes along that helps us get back to a normal sense, that we'll be back the media will be back in press boxes. locker rooms, clubhouses, media settings will return to what they were, and hopefully we can do our job in a normal way. For an old guy like me, that it's you have to kind of roll with the inconveniences, and change is harder for when you get older. It just is. You get kind of grumpy, and you just want things the way that you want them. And but you better you better figure out a way to adjust to this new world.
Just got a note from Darren. Coach Drinkwitz has named Connor Bazelak as a starting QB this week. So
How about that? Good move. I think so. So that's fundamental, isn't it? Do you go with a player with more experience but less eligibility remaining, or do you go with a young guy who you can live with his mistakes early, but hopefully grow into something special? I can remember Drew Lock's freshman year, and mistakes he made, and you lived with, and then by year 2, 3, he became a record-setting quarterback for the Tigers.
What do you think we're looking at for a college football playoff this season?
I'll tell you, that's a crazy situation for the people that are on that committee to have to evaluate teams that will have played 11 games against teams that will have played 7 and 8. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 coming in, their season's not starting until late October, early November, and Big 12 and ACC started first, then the SEC, and both of those leagues are going to get in 10 or 11 games. I don't know how it's important to have it. It's a cash cow. There's a lot of money that gets distributed not only to the Power 5 schools, but also the Group of 5, and everybody kind of depends on that money. So it's important to have it, but I don't envy the committee having to measure a 6-1 Oregon team versus maybe a 10-2 or maybe a 9-2 Georgia team, or maybe a 9-1 Oklahoma State team. It's going to be very difficult. In fact, I would even guess how that's going to be determined, but it's funny with the AP poll, everybody's eligible to be voted upon. So what do you do with an Ohio State, an Oregon, a Wisconsin, teams that you thought in the preseason would be very good? How do you rank them against teams that have played 2, 3, 4 games already this year? I got to figure that out every week. And what I've been doing is kind of dropping those teams that haven't played and elevating teams that have proven something on the field ahead of them. And that's always going to be the case this year because, Alabama and Georgia and Oklahoma State and Clemson will have all played 3 or 4 more games than Ohio State or Oregon or USC.
Let's turn the topic a little bit. Question: is there enough reason to be optimistic about the Royals' chances to be in the playoffs the next 2 seasons?
The next 2 seasons?
Or in the next 2 seasons, excuse me.
Yeah, I think if we can use a 2-season bracket for that, I think, to me, the next step is 500-ish with this young pitching staff, with Singer, with Bubich, with Brad Keller. Figure out what to do with Danny Duffy. I personally think he should go to the bullpen. I still wonder about Jacob Junis and what his future is with the Royals, but the bullpen was the biggest, the biggest improvement that the team made this year was in the bullpen. And by the end of the year, just watching Brady Singer start, that was appointment viewing for Royals fans. And just think about the idea that the Royals drafted a starting pitcher, and seemed to be developing him into a potential star. That doesn't happen often with the Royals organization. They do a lot of other things, have done a lot of other things well over the past decade or so, but drafting and developing starting pitching hasn't been one of them. So it's pretty exciting to see what this rotation could end up being. And I know Royals fans are tired of hearing about being patient, and especially after I think the Marlins lost 100 games or 100 games plus last year, and they're not only in the playoffs but advanced around in the playoffs this year. I know it was a truncated season, but based on and the Marlins, screwed up the COVID
Right.
protocols and had their problems at the beginning of the year, but they took advantage and got made a short season burst and got themselves in the playoffs. I'm I'm to put it this way. I'm glad the Royals traded Trevor Rosenthal and got back the hitter that showed
Alvarez.
Alvarez, who showed
Yeah.
promise there in the last couple weeks of the season, and that was the kind of move that was made to look at the future of this team. And so I think with the AL Central does seem to be tough with the White Sox, a young, strong team. I think the Indians are going to come back a little bit, but they're it's such a well-run organization. Same with the Minnesota Twins, the organization that has no postseason success, but seems to dominate the regular season. So the Royals are going to have their work cut out for them. I just think if this can be a close to 500 team next year and 2 years from now, after they've used some of their maybe some pitching parts to get a hitter, they need a bat in that lineup. This is a lineup full of 7, 8, and 9 hitters for the most part. They really need to get some consistency. Listen, I know Whit Merrifield's a hit machine, and Soler led the league in homers, and Perez had a terrific bounce back year this year. There needs to be a couple more of those types of bats if the Royals are going to. Whenever I see the Royals play another American League Central team, we get down to the 7th and 8th, spots in the order for the White Sox or the Twins, and I'm thinking, yeah, that guy can hit. I got to be careful with this guy. And you get there with the Royals, and it's not the same. And you go back to the World Series teams when Alex Gordon, who was more in his prime in 14 and 15, was hitting 8th in the lineup,
Right.
and Alex Rios was hitting 9th, and guys that had been league leaders in some offensive categories at some point in their careers, and that's what it takes. That's what the Royals have to get to.
Okay. Question. Thoughts on the upcoming Mizzou basketball season?
Boy, I really haven't given it a lot of thought. But a lot of talent's back. A lot of talent's back from a team that finished well and played well down the stretch. We talked about how Eli Drinkwitz had a good summer. I think Konzo Martin had a really good summer as well. And I'll point to he agreed to join us at the Star on a diversity panel. We talked about the problems. This is maybe a week to 10 days after the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis, and Konzo joined us. Bill Self was on it. Bob Kendrick from the Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City. Tyrann Mathieu, the chief safety, participated. Dayton Moore, the Royals general manager, they all joined us in a conference call. We were talking about the social unrest and social justice, and I guess Konzo had said expressed some of these ideas in a press conference earlier, a couple of days earlier, but he went even further, talking to us, and I just have never heard him so open and honest about how he felt about those issues. And it's just one of those moments where I just thought, wow, if you're a Missouri fan, you got to be really, really happy and proud that he's your coach. Now, once again, just like I was referring to with Drinkwitz, the proof is in the pudding, right? You got to win. You have to win, and the SEC is becoming increasingly difficult, a place to win, to break through. They're sending more teams to the NCAA tournament every year, and what's it been? Is it 1 in 3 years for Konzo at the end, first year in, and
Right.
and the next 2 not? And
Right.
so he's just one of those guys I find myself pulling for. I hope it works. I hope it really works out for him. I think he's a good coach, and I think with Missouri basketball, you just have to you have to come to grips with the style, the way he wants to play. The games aren't going to be, they're going to be more slugfests and dogfights than they are, just soaring up and down the court and these beautiful ballet exercises. That's just who Missouri is and what he's about. And when you get players who can buy into that, then you've got a chance to win. I think he's got a team that'll do that. It's a team that's going to, with experience. I think they like him as a coach. That makes a big difference as well. So 500 or 500 certainly gets you in the NCAA tournament. From if you're 500 in the SEC, it gets you in the NCAA tournament. I think that's a legitimate aspiration for Missouri this year. Get out of the, and I think they would have been, right. They would not have played in the 11 through 14. I think they would have been the 10 seed this past year and would have missed the 11 through 14 games. I want to say that's true.
That is correct. I think,
so, which was a small step, but a step.
Because they played the Wednesday night games, or going to, I think, and then Thursday everything was canceled.
Right. So they didn't get to play.
Right.
They didn't get to play in Nashville. So just I always hate that first day of the SEC tournament, and you've got no hope for any kind of postseason play. But listen, college basketball was the first sport to really become impacted by COVID-19, right? Losing the conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament, which means they've had the longest amount of time to prepare for the following season. And they get to go to school on football's mistakes, right? Students returning to campus, COVID outbreaks, in campus towns. So college basketball dealing with fewer numbers, better ability to create a bubble for its environment. I think that we're going to see a more complete basketball season than maybe what we thought we might have seen in late summer. And I know that the Dan Gavitt of the NCAA, who oversees college Division I men's college basketball, is really encouraged by the thought of there being as full a regular season as we can have, with an NCAA tournament and a Final Four this coming year. I don't think they're going to have to go to. We thought maybe tournaments and bubbles in early part of the season. I'm not sure we're going to have to do that, but it is going to be kind of weird to see the Maui tournament played on the mainland, and there's one that I think was scheduled for the Virgin Islands. It's going to be played in South Dakota. That's going to be a little odd, but there'll be some adjustments with the schedule, as we're seeing with college football. You'll see more of that with college basketball, more games, easier to move and everything. But I think and it's going to start later. We know that. November 25th, I think, is the start date for college basketball instead of the 2 weeks earlier with the Champions Classic. So I'm, as a college basketball aficionado, I'm really kind of excited about what we're going to see with college hoops this year.
Okay, a couple other questions. Today marks the 30th anniversary of the Fifth Down game.
I wasn't going to bring it up. I wouldn't. I knew that. I was not going to bring it up.
Were you watching that game, or what do you remember about it?
I wasn't there, but I was watching it. Now, here are my couple of memories from that day. I didn't know what was going on. People knew that was there, and I trust people who say they knew what was going on. They said they knew what was going on. That's fine. I didn't know. But I was watching the game. It was one of the games not every game was televised then. You didn't get to see every game on TV, but that game was the Big 8 game of the week. And Dave Armstrong was the play-by-play guy for that game. And it took him, I can't remember I don't know who the color analyst was, but it took them a little while to figure it out, but they finally figured it out. What I remember was there was a scene in all the post-game confusion, on the other side of the end zone, just on the playing field end zone, on the other side of the end zone, you can see Carl James, then Big 8 Commissioner Carl James, standing there looking at everything, and people arguing with each other, and nobody seems to know what was going on. And he finally turns and walks away. I think he knew at that point a big mistake had been made, and he better get his butt back to Kansas City, because he was going to have to deal with just a terrible confusion and mess. And the aftermath of that, we've all written stories about it. We've all had our favorite stories. I'll give you two that have stuck with me. Covering the Chiefs over the last few years with Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid, right? Andy Reid, assistant Missouri coach at the time, and Eric Bieniemy, of course, running back for Colorado. They don't want to talk about it. You bring this up, and the enemy kind of laughs it off, but he won't elaborate and won't sit down and talk about it for a story, because he knows how much it still bothered Andy Reid. And so it is basically a topic that's off limits with those two guys. I remember trying to get into it. It was about 5 years ago for the 25th anniversary, and I ended up writing a small story, and that was part of it. How the, that they do not want to talk about it at all. And the other thing that I've got a copy of it on tape, and I guess I didn't know this, and everybody else did. I was the last one to see this. The down marker, right? You see the down marker flip from 3 back to 2, and that was the problem. It wasn't, it wasn't on the officials counting. It was the down marker that flipped automatically. You just go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and when it went from 2 to 3, where it should have been, it went back to 2. So what should have been third down was seen on the field as second down, and that's why there was an additional down in that game. And of course, he didn't get in the end zone anyway. Charles Johnson didn't get in the end zone.
That's
That's like what? That was such a bad moment. And thankfully, you can't point to that and say, well, that changed everything for Mizzou football. It didn't. It didn't. They were going to have maybe that season they get one more. They get a nice victory over a ranked opponent, but I don't think that was going to change the fate of Bob Stoll or the direction of Missouri football. It got better later in the 90s, and then after Larry Smith, it changed again with Gary Pinkel, and it's just one of those moments in time that you hate to be on the losing end of that because it comes up every 5 years, as it is today.
Go. Want to ask you about the Chiefs? Seemed like a bit of a slog last night, but they still won by 2 touchdowns, and a win's a win. Where are they? They looked so great a week ago. Obviously, they went against the best defensive coach of all time last night, and he bothered Patrick's son. Your thoughts on that game?
Yeah. They beat the Patriots by 16, and it's like, gosh darn, boy, they gotta get better. But there's some truth to that. The Patriots were certainly playing with the right arm tied behind their back with Brian Hoyer and then Jared Stidham. And the Chiefs defense did exactly what it should do when confronted with that situation, right? A couple of quarterbacks that don't get first team snaps. You take advantage of that, and the Chiefs did. Yes, if you're a Chiefs fan, you're troubled by the inability to put the ball in the end zone in the first half after a couple of decent looking drives. And then finally, the breakthrough didn't come until late third quarter and then into the fourth. I don't know. It reminded me a little bit of the Chargers game and the way that the Chargers defend the Chiefs, in that they get pressure by rushing 4 and then play everybody back basically, right, and have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce blanketed. Even though those guys ended up making some big plays last night, not huge numbers games for those two guys. And Mahomes said something interesting after the game. He said that the Patriots are the team where after it goes back to the bench, he sits down and looks at the video and discovers something that he hadn't seen before. And that's quite I think an expression of admiration toward Bill Belichick and the defensive coaches with the Patriots. Because even though they were absolutely at a disadvantage offensively last night, the Patriots did everything they had to do defensively to win that game, and that they shortened it, limited the number of Chiefs possessions, held them to field goals. I asked the question on our post-game show last night: if Cam Newton had played for the Patriots last night, would they have won the game, or if the game had been Sunday? If Cam had, they certainly would have started differently. Mm-hmm. I think the Patriots would have won the first half, and the Chiefs in the second half, how good they've been historically with Patrick Mahomes. So 4-0, a couple of wins that you're gleeful about, the Texans and the Ravens, and a couple like the Chargers and the Patriots, you just wonder. But gosh, 4-0 for the 4th straight year. I didn't realize that was an NFL record.
Yeah.
Hell, Ohio State and Alabama start that way every year they've ever had football, and the Chiefs set the NFL record for doing that last night. I think it's the best team in the NFL. I think they're a terrible matchup for the Ravens, and I think the Ravens might end up. I think they're going to prove to be the second best team in the AFC when it's all said and done. Fascinated by the Bills game coming up on Thursday night in 2 weeks after they play the Raiders on Sunday, and if the Chiefs end up winning that game, then I don't know, the Steelers maybe. I don't know who would think about, not being how the Chiefs would not be the number one seed in the AFC, and that is a big advantage. The biggest
Yes.
advantage it's ever been is now with an extra team now in the playoffs. The 2 seed has to play a first round game this year for the first time. So you absolutely want to be the number 1 seed.
All right. Blair, thank you for your time. You're great as always. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's great talking to you guys. Really, I miss seeing you, miss JoJo, miss the burgers,
Yeah.
and I think I've said this before. It's my dream in life to have a beer at lunch, and the first time I'm going to do that is at the Tiger Club.
All right. I'll buy. How's
All
that?
right, sounds
Okay.
good.
All right. Hey, folks, thanks for watching today. You can also watch this on YouTube. Next week, our guest will be Blair's buddy, Seren Petro, from 810 Sports. And then don't forget, if you're interested in buying parking passes for any of the upcoming home games, send an email to president@kctigerclub.com. Again, Seren Petro next week. That'll be at noon on Tuesday, October 13th. Make sure you get your memberships in. Go to kctigerclub.com for more information. Thanks for looking in today. Have a great week.